Question. Hey Kim, thanks for all that you do. You have helped me a lot. I was wondering, will the military still exist in the Golden Age? I imagine that in a truly peaceful and unified society, there would be no need for the military and people wouldn't support it. How can humanity get to a point where we stop giving so much energy to the military? Also, is it wrong for a spiritual person to join the military? I've seen that Serapis Bey in one of his past lives was Leonidas, so can spiritual growth and military service ever align? Okay, so these are two very different questions, but let's start with the Golden Age and military. It's clear that as we move into Saint Germain's Golden Age, the military will at some point stop existing, because there will be no need for it. But that is more of a long-term goal. It's not something, we're not talking decades here. And the reason for this is that there's a lot of complicated factors that play into this equation. And I understand that many spiritual people who have an intuitive sense that the military should go away. You go back to the 1960s and the whole hippie movement. They had a lot of sense that peace and love is the way to go. But Jesus also said, be harmless, be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. And many spiritual people are harmless as doves in the sense that they are not aggressive themselves, but they are not wise as serpents. They're not realizing that there are serpents on the planet in the form of what I call fallen beings. And I explained this in my video about how the world was created and several others in that playlist where I talk about why there's evil in the world, for example. So, as I explained, there are these beings who are what we in today's vernacular call narcissists, psychopaths, or sociopaths, or even a combination of all three. Now, people have no empathy. They don't care what consequences their actions have for other people. I've talked about before some of the dictators we've seen in history who didn't care how many of their own people were killed so that the dictator could achieve some kind of goal that he had defined. And as long as those people are on the planet, it'll be difficult to completely remove the military because they see the military as a justifiable means to achieve their ends. Now, I think there will come a transition phase, and that could be a matter of decades, where there is more and more of an awareness that there is this small minority of people who have created most of the conflicts we have seen in history. It's the same life streams that embody again and again and again, and then there, of course, are beings in the emotional, mental, and identity realms that also want war. And there can be more of an awareness of this in the short term. And as that grows, then the military will be less important. But I think it'll be a while before. And I would have told you differently before Russia invaded Ukraine. Because I would have said, with my understanding that I had at the time, that we were moving further and further away from an era where the military was such a big factor. But with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think the equation unfortunately shifted backwards towards the era we had in the Cold War and the Second World War and the First World War. And it's a temporary thing. I don't see it as something permanent, but what I see is that there are still these nations around the world where many of the people haven't transcended the mindset that justifies war. And I know many Russian people, I know many, but the Russian people I know are spiritual people. And they have, of course, transcended the mindset that war is justifiable. But I can see that a majority of the Russian people haven't, or they wouldn't support, or they would have objected more. I understand it's difficult to object, but nevertheless, what I'm saying is there is always a connection between the leaders and the collective consciousness of a nation. So if a critical mass of the Russian people had transcended the consciousness that war is the justifiable means to an end, I don't think the invasion could have happened. Or it would have stopped already. So what I'm saying is, there are still many people around the world, and you see them in other parts of the world, for example, Africa and Southeast Asia, with China, that believe that war is justified. And as long as, let's put it this way, the belief that war is justified comes from the fallen beings. But they can't go to war themselves. In fact, they never go on the front line. So they need people who will fight for them. And so as long as there are people who will fight for the fallen beings, we won't get over war. And in the long run, that will be transcended to the point where a majority of people are not going to be willing to fight for the fallen beings. As I said, if people become more aware of the fallen beings, yes, the equation will shift. But I do think that it is possible that as a transition phase, there will be the emergence of new technology that will make war unfeasible. Because you can't win it. And in a sense, you can say that the emergence of nuclear weapons did make war at a certain scale unwinnable, because most people recognize that if there was a nuclear war, nobody would really win. It's the mutually assured destruction. But what I'm talking about is that there could be, I can envision, and the masters have actually talked a little bit about this, that there can be an emergence of technology that, just as an example, let's say you had a flying machine that could hover in the air, anti-gravity machine, that had a shield around it like you see in science fiction movies, that it was impenetrable. No conventional weapon could destroy this craft. But at the same time, it could shoot at other weapons with either a laser weapon that could blow them up or a weapon that could dismantle other weapons. So an army couldn't shoot this flying machine down, but it could, the machine could destroy its weapons. So if you had that kind of technology, and if it was in control of a group of nations that were committed to peace, then you could have a situation where, for example, Russia couldn't launch the invasion in Ukraine because they would be destroyed by this world peace force. I'm not saying this is an ideal scenario. I'm not saying it necessarily will come to pass, but it's I think it's one of the possible scenarios. You could, of course, also in an interim phase have the emergence of a world peace force. You have seen attempts at that with the United Nations, but you could see more of a concerted effort to say, like NATO, for example, but expand it so that wherever there's war, there would be this force that would come in and defeat the aggressor in the war, so as to prevent this from happening. Just like you can say that NATO prevented the Cold War from becoming a hot war, because not only was there the nuclear threat, but there was also the very doubt of whether the Soviet Union could win a conventional war. And I think actually growing up in Denmark, there was this fear that the Soviet Union had a superior military, that had all these more tanks. But when I lived in Estonia and talked to people who grew up as part of the Soviet Union, they realized that the Russian-made technology was just so poor that they probably couldn't have defeated NATO. And you see in Ukraine today how, even though they have numerical superiority over Ukraine, they still haven't defeated them after 3.5 years. And so I'm just, I'm meandering off to other topics here, but I'm just saying that in the future I could see that there would be more of a world peace force that would emerge, that would say we got to stop these small regional wars and even stop a larger global war from happening just by a deterrent factor. But in the long run, I think it will be more about technology, and then in the longer run, raising of the collective consciousness, where there are just not enough people that believe, number one, that war is justifiable, number two, that it's actually a feasible way to achieve your ends, that they will support a dictator who's willing to go to war. And of course, if Putin had to go to the front lines and start shooting himself, yeah, he probably would have thought twice, right? Same thing with Hitler. So, no, short answer is, obviously there will come a point in the Golden Age where military will not exist. There will be, I think, some what you would call civil forces, to deal with natural disasters or other emergency situations. But you already have that to a large degree. But I think that the military will be converted more in that direction. But then, of course, as we go further into the Golden Age, there won't be so much need for it. I actually think that as we move a little further into the Golden Age, there will be an idea that will emerge that instead of doing military service, compulsory mandatory military service for, let's say, a year, all young people at a certain age, they have to go into a force that is sent to less developed nations. So the more developed nations will create this force that will go out and help less developed nations. And young people should all spend a year doing this so they can see how life is in other parts of the world, and they can feel they're doing something to help these people. So I could see that as being a replacement for military service in the short run, and where much of the money that's now spent on military hardware will be spent on machinery and technology to help less developed nations. And that's something I think happens, but unfortunately you can't really see that happening as long as there is this credible military threat, as there, for example, is now from Russia and China, and even some of the countries in the Middle East. So I think we have to move a little further before that can happen. But I do see the military being replaced by this humanitarian service rather than a military service.